Hey everybody, it's Saturday, June 21st. We're in the last day of the week 27 out of 30 weeks remaining for the end of the year, and what should be my entry or the end of my work experience and my transition into early retirement. I'm very excited about it, and this is another week down. You know, when you start doing these countdowns, you realize how quickly time goes. And sometimes I guess it feels slow, but these for me it's feeling pretty fast. I don't want this video to go too long. I have a few clips to put together from this week, and I'm trying to keep it within a reasonable amount of time. And I may end up making it 2 parts just to reduce the amount of time. I'm not sure what people like to watch, but so a couple of interesting things this week. One is the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. He announced that he would not be reducing interest rates. This affects the stock markets and the foreign exchange rates, which effect it impacts the world economy and the U.S. economy. So he's not reducing interest rates because inflation has not really come down yet to a point where he likes it. And unfortunately, Trump is calling him, I wish someone could control him. I mean, it's just crazy to see a world leader behaving the way he does. I mean, it is Trump, it's classic Trump. But he's calling him, like, in public forum, a big dummy. He called it the week before. He called Jerome Powell the numbskull, and this week he's calling him a big dummy. Too late. He always comes up with these little name calling things. Too late, Powell, he calls him. He's trying to rush him to reduce the interest rates. And I think Jerome Powell, he made a very bad decision a couple years ago, right after COVID. He didn't raise interest rates fast enough, so he was too late for that, and it's why we ended up in such a inflationary economy for a couple years in 21, 22. But it looks like Jerome Powell's trying to do the right thing this time and not go too aggressive, too fast, and I think he's probably right, but Trump wants him to bring down the interest rates because he wants to stimulate the economy, but the economy is doing pretty good already. Unemployment is low, and inflation is still higher than he prefers. So, but just calling him a dummy and just ridiculous. I know it's his style, but it is kind of comical. But at the same time, if I was doing that at work, I would be fired. I would be seriously reprimanded. Even more than messing up work-wise, if I was doing that with people, calling them names, it's just so childish. I would probably be fired, or seriously disciplined, or something, just for creating a toxic workplace. Although there's some behaviors in our office that are allowed, which is also I think. Irresponsible to keep people who do create toxic atmosphere, but just some things, just name calling, it's just so immature. I don't know how I get a job like that. Anyway, so I just want to end that there. The Iran and Israel I think there's a bit of a ceasefire there, and now the question is whether a U.S. gets involved, and I really hope we don't. This is not politics, or it has nothing to do with politics. In a way it does. I guess the support of Israel does have to do a lot with politics, but we just got to stay out of these wars. That's not our business. Just some interesting things I thought I would share. Did you know that the sun is 330 times heavier than the Earth? 330,000 times heavier than the Earth. 1.3 million Earths could fit into the sun. That's astronomical. That's incredible. 1.3 million Earths can fit into the sun. Just imagine that, you know. And then you look at the solar system. Our solar system, it says the sun makes up 98% of the solar system's mass. That is how huge the solar system is. To say there's life not on other planets, wow, amazing. Here's another interesting little quick quiz. Which of these foods is the most stolen food in the world? So, of all the products, which food product is stolen more than any other food globally? Out of chocolate, cheese, coffee, and alcohol. Coffee, cheese, coffee, chocolate, cheese, coffee, alcohol. My first pick was chocolate. It's actually cheese. 4% of all cheese production is stolen. Can you imagine? Cheese. I love cheese. It's expensive, so at least a good quality. So another thing I just wanted to mention here. A goal that I reached this week, not really a goal, but something I completed. So I finished a series called the Jesus Chronicles, and it's like the background stories of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the ones who wrote the Gospels. It was written by Jery Jenkins and Tim LaHaye. They wrote the Left Behind series, which it's the only books I've ever read from them. And I only remember reading them when they first came out, but I didn't even read the whole series. I think I read the first 1, 2, or 3 of them, but that was back in the 90s. That's really what put Jery Jenkins on the map. That series, I think, is a series of 9 books in them. But he wrote this series called Jesus Chronicles, and it's just the background story. Very interesting. I always wanted to know more about each one of these characters, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it made me realize that Luke and Mark were not actually disciples of Jesus. Only Matthew and John were. So they wrote their own Gospels. And then Luke also wrote the Acts of the Apostles. And I think that's when he teamed up with Paul and the other apostles to write the Acts of the Apostles. And Mark was, John obviously was the apostle that Jesus loved, that they referred to him as the one that Jesus loved. And he ended up dying in the end. I think he was the only one that died of old age. He was almost a martyr several times, but he ended up dying. I think he was the only one that died of old age. And then Mark was actually the son of he was the son of someone who supported Jesus throughout his life. But he basically recorded Peter's, because Peter was an uneducated man. He recorded Peter's testimony, and then I don't know if that's factual, but that's the way this book is portrayed. Mark followed the disciples after Jesus was crucified, and then and he was mostly enamored with Peter. Peter was an uneducated fisherman, and then Matthew was the tax collector. I thought Matthew was the most interesting one. That was fascinating, because one of the questions I always had was, why were the tax collectors so hated? They just, there was always one of the worst of sinners, and the Jews hated them because they were Jews who actually were working for the Romans. But I was wondering, why were they so hated? And then what would make someone want to follow in that profession? And this book kind of gives me an idea of what happened with Matthew. I won't give away the whole story, but Matthew started off as a religious. His parents wanted him to go into the faith and the Jewish faith and become a priest. And then something happened in his childhood that his younger brother was killed by Herod. And then he ended up hating God and living his life taking advantage of everything and anyone he could because he didn't feel any purpose in life. So, and then he found Jesus, and Jesus changed everything. I think it's a really beautiful story, and it's enough for me to understand why the tax collectors were so hated, and that Jesus would pick him as one of his disciples. And then the second, so Matthew was my favorite. Luke also is up there, very close to being one of them. A very close second to the. So Luke was a doctor, but Luke was born into slavery to Theolopius. I forget who the owner was, and his parents were the slaves of this guy. And when you read Luke and you read the Gospel of Luke and Acts, Luke is writing this to Theophilus. I think it's Theophilus. He's writing a letter to Theophilus, and Theophilus was his master. But Luke found favor in Theophilus' eyes when he was younger than he was a kid, and then Theophilus was a good man, and he treated his slaves very well, and he ended up putting him through school. And then the other interesting thing about Luke was when Luke went to school, Theophilus promised him his freedom as long as he served him for 5 more years after school. So he paid for his schooling. But so Luke went to school, and he ended up befriending Saul at the time, who later becomes Paul. So Paul becomes part of the story also. Really fascinating, and it was not what I expected from Luke as the doctor of the group and the highly educated one. So I really recommend those. The third in line was John, and then for me, as in my preference, and then Mark was the last one. Mark came across as a little conflated, like they were trying to force the story. It was still interesting. So anyway, at the end of these books, each one of these novels, it took me about 8 hours to read each one, and then the gospel is part of the book, but it's at the end of each one of the books. So you have the part of the Bible in with the purchase of these books. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. And then speaking biblically, so I just read something this morning from Proverbs 19:11. I am still in First Chronicles. First Chronicles is still a lot of genealogy, and I'm skimming through it. I'm picking out names and remembering stories because you do want to honor people who were in the past before them. But I'm in Proverbs 11. This said, "The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression." This really stood out to me because, this is when we get in trouble. We get in trouble when we demand to be right. When we're with family and friends and at work, when we demand to be right. And we demand everyone to see things our way and refuse to look over or look past other people's transgressions. And this leads to resentment with family and friends and even colleagues. We end up alienating ourselves just for the right to be right, just for the sake to be right. You may be right, but you need to use discretion in how you believe what is the truth. And I think I see a relative. I have a relative who is. This reminds me of a relative who has for some reason made this argument that she's going to keep her siblings and her relatives off at arm's distance for stuff we don't even know that happened in the past. I can't understand it. It's like a spirit of grudge, a spirit of unforgiveness, and she's holding that against the rest of us. And I think, by doing so, she's pushing everybody away for something, for some transgression that we've done to her that we don't even know. And I think it's really sad. I really think it's sad. Nobody has any idea why she's doing what she's doing, just pushing people away and making us pay for stuff that we don't even know anything we did wrong. What the heck was that? That was weird. That was a weird noise. That was a weird bird. That was freaky. Oh, that's someone upstairs. That really spooked me. That was a weird bird noise. Gave me goosebumps. That must be someone up there. Anyway, so I just see this happening with someone in the family, just pushing people away for holding things against people, and even when I remember talking to her at times, bringing up stuff from 40 years ago, and you're like, you're holding a grudge against your family for that, and she just won't let go. And I just think it's really sad, and literally rejecting the rest of us, in family chats and other kind of other kind of relationships, just rejecting us. And I saw she did that with anyway. So one of the reasons this is for me personally, one thing that stands out is I have something that's I've done with my own life at work. I see, when I know I'm right about something, it's hard for me to keep my mouth shut. And when something is proven that I am right at some point, and I never get credit for it, I just keep my mouth shut. There's no point in kicking a dead horse. I don't like to burn people, but I do like people to understand, decisions that they're making. But one of the things that I've been doing in the past as part of my quiet quitting is letting go. I don't bring up things that or decisions that were made that I knew were wrong at the time, and I don't rub it into people's faces, and it's given me a lot more peace. I don't like to burn people. Let me say it. How can I put this? I don't need people to know they were wrong. I just need to know. I want people to know something was wrong, and that there was someone who was speaking truth, and who was giving a warning that something was going to happen if the right decision wasn't made. And I've been letting go, and I'm telling you, it's just created a lot more peace. It's hard to know, sometimes you do need to speak truth, and sometimes it does cause a conflict. But I know I don't know anything. The more you think you know, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. And I do want to be cognizant of that, and I don't want to be arrogant. But me keeping my mouth shut as I'm entering into my last phase of work has just brought me much more peace. I don't need to fight anymore. I let people the leadership will do what they do, and then that's it. And speaking of that, my boss has said a couple times in the past week or two, multiple times to a small group of us, he's like, we're all dispensable. We're all dispensable. All the employees are dispensable. How can someone be, that in a way that might be true. Everybody is replaceable, but to put it in such a way to your key leaders like that, I agree in principle, but to really say that to people who are supposed to be loyal and supposed to be devoting your time to making the best decisions for the organization and in support of what he wants, his vision and what he wants to do. Actually, he has no vision. His vision is what we tell him. And then he's the one telling us that everybody's dispensable. You know, it's crazy. You know, there's 4 of us on this task force for the organizational planning, and 2 of us are really coming up with all the ideas. He doesn't come up with any of them. He has no idea of himself on his own, and he's telling us we're all dispensable. So I'm like, you know, why do I want to stay in this? Why do I want to stay here? This is not someone I want to work for. This is not someone I want to work with. So it's just letting that go, making it so much easier for me to leave. Fine, we're dispensable, right? Me and this other guy and some of the other person, we're the ones coming up with all the ideas and the documentation and the work putting in to provide to the board to make the decision. We're doing it. He doesn't do any of it. He just sits there and listens and then agrees one way or the other. And he's the one getting paid all the big bucks. It's just outrageous. But we're the ones who are dispensable. So good luck. That's all I can say. And I'm not saying this salty. I'm saying this let it go. Peace. Peace I leave with you. Peace be with you. You pay the consequences of this kind of attitude, and I'm not going to be responsible for it. I wash my hands. So it's supposed to be a positive. I want this to end on a positive note. This is positive, and it makes it easier for me to leave, and I'm ready to go. And so this is Choice, winding down the Chronicles of an expat going into early retirement on a modest budget in Southeast Asia. I'm not retired yet, but I'm getting there. Thank you for being with me on week 27. Tomorrow we'll start week 26. And in the meantime, until the next one, God bless and take it slow.